me tell you about her background real quick. Annie is assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the Winston Distinguished Fellow at the Winston National Center on Technology Use, Brain, and Psychological Development. She grew up right here in Vermont, in South Hero, and graduated from UVM with a BA in psychology in 2015. And then went on to receive her Ph.D. in development and social psychology from the University of Pittsburgh in 2023. So thank you again, Annie, for being here. I am going to mute myself and allow you to take the floor.
Perfect. Thanks, Amy. And thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to chat with you all. I'm curious if people have access to like the chat function, if you can just drop in the age of your children. And no worries if you're, doing other things, listening to this on your AirPods or something. But I'm very curious since there are so many different ways that tech can influence the lives of everyone across ages, but in different ways for kids of different ages. Okay, so some maybe early high school, middle high school, younger. Okay, sounds like we have a range. So I'm going to share a bit about my research, including some kind of like broad ideas that can, I think, be helpful for anyone living in the digital world. And then I'll talk a little bit about some practical strategies. And the goal is that I have 4 sections, and after each section, I'll pause and see if people have questions or if we want to have this be a little bit more of a conversation. I'm happy to do that. So feel free to drop questions in the chat and Amy can help field those at the pauses. And then during those pauses, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to do that as well. I welcome that. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so yes, I am now at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I just moved here in July, so I'm still getting used to it, but the sun is beautiful here. It was 70 degrees today, and I heard that y'all are getting a nor'easter this week, so I miss Vermont so deeply, and also I don't miss that nor'easter in March. So a bit about me. I grew up in South Hero, born and raised, lived there my whole life, went to the University of Vermont. There's me with my first phone. It was a flip phone that I would text my friends with when I went to Rice Memorial High School. I got my PhD in Pittsburgh, and now I'm directing the Social Environments and Adolescence Lab at UNC. So I focus broadly on kind of social and contextual experiences that adolescents have. And one of the really big contexts that we know adolescent development is occurring in right now is the digital context. So that's a major focus of my work. And here is my lab. They're phenomenal. They're just the best. And we are all affiliated with the Winston National Center on Technology Use, Brain, and Psychological Development. So there's this kind of like big and growing research center here at UNC that's really focused on trying to understand these issues and opportunities and solutions. And if you're interested in learning more, we have tons of resources on the website, and we're like always doing new stuff and creating new resources for families and parents. So I'll leave that up for just a second if anyone's interested in checking that out. And we are new and growing, so the website is on its way up. I don't think it's entirely done yet. There's a couple glitches, but it's going to look great very soon. So I have 4 sections of my talk. I'm going to give some background that is a little bit theoretical in nature about like what is digital media and how is it different from talking to a person in person. So I'll give a little bit of the more kind of like in the weeds descriptions there that hopefully will be relevant as we start to contextualize questions about, for example, how digital media can hurt us or our kids, and how it can also help us and our kids. And so my research really focuses on adolescents, but I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about, applies to people of all ages. So hopefully you might take away something that can help your teen or help you as well. And that's especially true for the practical strategies section, where I'll talk about how to take some of this information and apply it to your life or your teen's life. So what exactly is digital media? Why is it this thing that we are so concerned about and care so much about? So you all have seen these headlines. They are pretty sensational. They suggest that social media or digital media has perhaps destroyed an entire generation. So there's a lot of concern, and perhaps rightfully so to some degree, about the potential harm of digital media for young brains and young lives. And so these headlines kind of beg the question, is digital media bad for teens? So we know from an enormous amount of research literature that it's actually about more than just screen time, or more than just like how much time is a kid spending on their smartphone or on social media. Those kind of measurements are straightforward and easy to use, but they're kind of crude. They obscure the broad range of different experiences that kids might have on social and digital media, things that might be positive or might be negative. And so I think this question of, is digital media good or bad for my teen, is probably not the right question to ask, unfortunately. I wish that the simple question and the simple answer were the right one, but in this context, it really probably is not. And we know also that adolescent development is this incredible time of change and growth, and for some kids, turmoil. You all have teens, you've seen the immense ways that they grow and develop during this stage of life. One of the biggest features of adolescent development is the importance of peers and social development. And so there's actually evidence that the brain restructures and reorganizes in a way that people call a second sensitive period for sociocultural processing. So we think of the sensitive period when kids learn language early in life as a time when they have to hear language in order to develop language skills. And adolescence may also be this time when neurobiological development is such that kids are actually so attuned to peers and peer feedback and peer acceptance or rejection in a way that's different from any other time of life. It's also a critical time for identity exploration and development, the time when kids are really focused on themselves and trying to figure out who they are as they grow into adult human beings. And all of these things are related as well to neurobiological developments that have to do not just with focusing on social skills and social reward, but also on cognitive control. So it's a period of life when the cognitive control system is kind of coming online and developing, and the social reward system is really, really strong and really, really online. And so having the skills to experience that cognitive inhibition, to put the phone down or to not check the phone when there's so much social reward on the phone, this is a really kind of a perfect storm for kids when it comes to making the best decisions for their digital health. And so instead of thinking about digital media as something that might be bad for kids, I think it's more important that we think in these complex terms, that digital media might be this kind of double-edged sword. It can exploit these vulnerabilities that are inherent in the adolescent developmental period, things related to social connection and response inhibition, behavioral inhibition. But it's also something that can provide unique opportunities. And especially for kids who are really excited about connecting with their peers during this time, digital media can provide some of those connections. And so there's this framework that I use a lot in my research. This is where we start to get a little bit in the weeds, but I promise we'll come back out. So the idea here is that there are features, specific features or affordances of digital platforms that actually transform the way that we have social interactions. This is true of anyone, but maybe particularly relevant when we're trying to think about teens and their well-being. And so these features include that most social media is highly visual. So photos, videos are at the center of the user experience. They're also available 24/7. So unlike in past generations when you had to, walk over to the neighbor's house to talk to your friend, now you can talk to your friend 24/7 with the phone that's always in your pocket. The information posted online is relatively permanent, or at least it can be permanent. So, unlike making a bad decision when no one is taking a photo of it, when that bad decision is posted online, that can be available in perpetuity. But there's also the possibility of images or posts to be ephemeral in nature. Things like Snapchats or these like 24-hour stories are also possible. The information on social media can be highly public, although there's also opportunities for private interactions. And it's public in a way that our species has never fully experienced before. So kids can go online and have access to millions of other people who they may be able to interact with or who may be an audience viewing their posts. Digital media also allows for asynchronous conversation. So instead of being able to, talk in real time back and forth, kids can have conversations or engage in some kind of digital interaction where there's a time lag between the interaction components. Digital media also offers many fewer social cues, things like tone of voice or facial expression or body language, these things that make for really rich and often really valuable interpersonal interactions where we get rich information from each other. Often we don't have those online. And unlike in the real world, digital media and most social media platforms in particular offer these quantifiable metrics. So whereas previously we might have had to wonder, like, how many friends do I have, for example? Now teens have a number that can quantify that. It can quantify the number of likes that they get on an image, maybe of themselves that can feel really vulnerable to post and then not get positive feedback on. And then finally, most of the feeds on these social media platforms are algorithmic, which means that they're not just curated based on a child's, desired content that they'd like to see, but on the content that the social media company thinks will keep the teen on the platform longer for the sake of profit. And so what does this look like in real life? So here is an Instagram photo of me from 2015 when I was graduating from UVM. I'm presenting my honors thesis. And we can see that it's highly visual, right? The photo is the biggest part of this post. It's permanent. It's been up there for very, very long, since I was like 22. It's available 24/7. People can pull up Instagram and scroll through my posts and see it at any time, day or night. And there's the opportunity for asynchronous communication. They can leave a comment. I can see it later. It's highly public. 27 people liked this post back in 2015. And that number is a number. It's quantifiable to me. And the opportunity to have these really rich social connections with rich social cues is absent. The only thing someone can see is my username and a picture that I chose for my profile. And the Explore page on Instagram, which mirrors many different functions on things like TikTok or new features on Snapchat, is highly algorithmic. So all of these images and videos are selected to try to keep me watching those videos and images longer. And so we know that mental health is a huge challenge for teens. I'm sure this is an idea that is not new to anyone in this call. It's also the case that Vermont teens are doing relatively well when we think about the overall well-being across the United States. The overall well-being index indicates that Vermont teens are ranked 5th in the nation, however you want to interpret that. But we also know that, like teens in other parts of the country, there's been an increase in anxiety and depressive symptoms for kids in Vermont around the country in the last several years. And this increase is really concerning, in part because it does mirror the increase in kids' digital media use. So for example, this is nationally representative data that shows that just the time kids are spending online has been inching up and up over the years. And this is also for kids who are considered tweens, kids who are under 13, who are too young to, technically be on social media, but who have access to smartphones or laptops or tablets. But again, the amount of time kids are spending on their screens is potentially obfuscating the specific experiences that they're having. And we know that there's a range of different digital devices in terms of hardware, but also different software, different apps that kids can use, different ways that they can use technology to explore, to engage with their peers, etc. And so my lovely undergraduate research assistants put together a couple of images to just provide a little glimpse. If you yourself don't have an Instagram or a Facebook, for example, some ways that we can think about how those features apply to the types of things that your teen might be doing if they're on Instagram or Snapchat. So we know on Instagram, there are the opportunity to have these long-term posts, but also 24-hour posts. So the degree to which posts are relatively permanent or more ephemeral can change within a given platform. And the degree to which these posts can be public, or there can be opportunities for private direct messages, also can vary within a single platform. There are also opportunities to share information like one's physical location, for example, on Snapchat. And one concerning thing about this is that the default setting is typically for this to be on, which means that anywhere a child goes, anyone who they're friends with on Snapchat can see their physical location. And there is a way to turn it off. And there is also a way to have some parental controls that I'll talk about in a second. But Snapchat also allows for these private direct interactions, as well as this kind of public exploration of someone's physical location. And it also allows that kind of self-focused attention, so taking photos of the self, applying filters, which can be really fun and can be really harmless, and also can potentially pose harms if a child is concerned about their self-presentation or physical appearance, for example. And then just about every app these days offers these algorithmically curated feeds. So Snapchat used to be different. It's not anymore. It now has this algorithmic feed. Um, Instagram has it now. Twitter has it, although it's more text focused. And TikTok is essentially the first platform that focused on these kinds of algorithmic feeds that aim to present something that that individual user is most interested in or will keep them most engaged. And so it's important to consider that these features can vary within and across platforms. And this is just a small subset of the platforms that teens use. And, you know, in the next year or two, these could go away and we could have totally new platforms that teens are using. But that's why this feature approach can be helpful, because we can start to conceptualize some of the features of media that might span across platforms. So even when teens are using something new, like Be Real, for example, which is a platform that is much more focused on private dyadic interactions than public facing interactions, then we can think about how these features can potentially afford positive or negative social and psychological experiences. So that brings me to the end of the first section, where I'm just describing some of these components of digital media. So I'd like to pause and see if anyone has any questions so far before I move on.
We haven't had anything in the chat yet, Annie.
Yeah, so far so good.
Great. Sounds good. I'll keep going then. We can chat at the end.
Yeah, very interesting.
Great. All right. So my next question here is focus on some of the harms of digital media. And much of my research kind of takes a balanced approach to try to acknowledge that there are some potential harms and some potential benefits. But I want to be really clear that I think the harms are incredibly important to consider. And we know that at least the purported purpose of social media is to provide connection and to help users, essentially. Mark Zuckerberg's mission for Facebook, this was the mission from a couple years ago, has to do with giving people power and giving people connection, these things that sound really great, of course. But as we all probably know, it's not that digital media doesn't have any benefits, but it is not designed to benefit us. It is designed to benefit the companies that run it and that get ad revenue the more that us and our children are spending their time on these platforms. And that is really critical to consider, because it means that we need to take the reins and make some really tough decisions to put down this device, this thing that is so incredibly rewarding and so thrilling and so exciting. And especially thrilling and exciting if you have an adolescent brain, a brain that is hardwired to care about social information and feedback, social quantifiable feedback, that one is accepted or approved by your peer context. These things are absolutely so exciting. And that means we have to work extra hard to be in control of how we use these things. And so you've probably heard this idea that digital media provides variable rewards. So the schedule at which the rewards are provided is not continuous. It's not that every time you open your phone, you have the best experience possible. It's that sometimes when you open your phone, you have a notification and some exciting information that's associated with that, and sometimes you don't. And that randomness, that feeling that we never actually know exactly when we're going to be rewarded, is by design. It's a design that was first implemented in slot machines. And it's this idea that we'll keep coming back, always hoping kind of that this is the time. This is like an essential finding from the behaviorist literature back in like the 60s or 70s. When we're rewarded on a variable rather than a continuous schedule, we have a really hard time letting go of the possibility that we might get a reward the next time we pick up that thing. And this is not a coincidence. This is by design. There's a book that was written by someone who designed the infinite scroll. So the thing where on social media, you can just like keep scrolling and literally never run out of stuff to look at. And he wrote this book, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. The goal is for us to have a habit, for us to be more or less behaviorally addicted to this device. And it's working for the most part. We know that kids are spending an inordinate amount of time on digital media. Just about everyone uses the internet daily. Some of that use is great. Some of that is for academic or social purposes, but it's pervasive. About half of kids in the United States, this is a nationally representative sample, say that they are online almost constantly. And on average, for kids who are growing up today, kids who are in Generation Z, they spend about 8 hours of their day on digital media. Again, using it for a variety of reasons, sometimes really positive things, but 8 hours a day. And when you tally that up over a lifetime, that's 30 years of nonstop screen time for kids today. 30 years of their life will be spent on a screen. That's an enormous amount of time, and something that I think should make us pause. That even if it's not just about screen time, which it's not, it's much more complicated than that, but this is a lot of screen time, and perhaps something that we should be concerned about. Because at a basic level, this amount of screen time can displace the things that we know are really good for teens. So because we only have a limited amount of time, that time can be displaced with digital media, things like hanging out with friends, going down to Charlottetown Beach and enjoying Lake Champlain, enjoying the great outdoors, or reading. I don't remember the last time I personally just picked up a book and read it. And there's so much value too in just kind of quiet contemplation and being bored and learning how to be creative. And a lot of this time is being displaced by just scrolling on our phones. But it's not just the amount of time, it's also that digital media can cause unique stressors. And this is because of these different features and how they transform social experiences. So for example, a lot of teens report pressure to be available all the time. They feel like they have to respond to their friends because they can, or like they have to be posting online to be to be visible to the peer network. And this is because of that 24/7 availability and the opportunity for these asynchronous interactions. And this can create a feeling of communication overload, which I personally feel like most of the time when I open my email, just this constant barrage of interactions that are actually not super fulfilling. And that's in part because they are absent of these rich social cues. They're just sort of potentially vapid or shallow interactions or information or things that we have to sift through to try to find that nugget of meaning. And that can be really stressful, and that can also displace the really valuable social interactions that can happen in person. As we all know, also, victimization online is not just possible, but it's pretty common for teens. And this can include things like cyberbullying, but it can also include being the victim of discrimination or witnessing discrimination, which can also be really stressful. Experiencing sexting coercion, so being coerced to send or take a sext, or having a sext non-consensually sent to other people can be really stressful, as can digital dating abuse. So this can include things like a partner controlling what someone posts on social media, or monitoring their location via, for example, the Snapchat location tracker. And all of these things can be just exacerbated in the digital context. We know that they exist in the offline context, but for example, when cyberbullying is ever present, when it's not just at school, but it's all the time because your phone is in your pocket 24/7, that can really exacerbate that experience. And because social media is really visual and public, we can witness more of these discriminatory experiences that happen in the world instead of just have those experiences happen to us. And again, the visualness and the permanence of images that are posted and shared online can make sexting have more negative consequences. And so all of these different features can shape the way that online victimization and other types of peer stressors can impact kids. And there's other types of stressors as well, especially related to this kind of self-presentation that kids can think about a lot online in terms of how they take photos and share photos of themselves or talk about themselves online. So kids report a lot of anxiety about experiencing approval, getting enough likes, for example, on their posts. And this is often shaped by these features that social media is visual, and it provides these quantifiable metrics of approval. Kids also report fear of missing out, or FOMO. So if you see an image posted on social media of your friends hanging out, especially if you weren't invited, that can be incredibly stressful. And that's information that someone might not have known before the publicness of social media made that information public. And then finally, one component of social media that gets a lot of attention, I think rightfully so, is the role of appearance-related social media use and social comparison. And so because social media is highly visual, it emphasizes not just images, but physically attractive images and highly edited and curated images. So kids are really prone to engage in upward social comparison. And to be clear, social comparison is not a bad thing. There's a lot of ways that we benefit by trying to understand who we are in relation to other people. But this constant comparison to these really impossible standards of beauty, these images that are just not real or not representative of how human beings look, can have a really negative effect, especially for younger kids who are still trying to figure out what is real and what is a realistic standard. Because the images that are posted online are typically these highlight reels or highly edited and curated images, it can be really hard to disaggregate which of these images maybe is representative of the real world. And these features can also give rise to fundamentally new or novel experiences in the digital world. So for example, I've done some work on a construct that we're calling appearance-related social media consciousness. This is the constant preoccupation with how someone looks to a digital media audience. And it's really common. Most kids report having some of these experiences, and it can include things like looking at one's publicly posted photos over and over again and trying to imagine how other people respond to them. Or even thinking about social media photos in the offline world. So being at a birthday party with friends, but being really laser focused on what would I look like if a photo of me was taken right now and posted to social media, instead of just kind of enjoying that moment for what it is. And we know that appearance-related social media consciousness can have really negative effects. There's some emerging evidence that it is causally related to depressive symptoms among kids of all genders. It's not just girls that experience this. So it's definitely worth asking the question, is digital media all bad? There are a lot of bad parts of it. There are a lot of things that we should be thoughtful about and concerned about, but I don't think it's the case that it is all bad. So let me pause there and see if anyone has questions or thoughts that they want to share before I move on to the next section.
Does any of your research or the work that you've done talk about how to talk to our kids about some of these topics? Read a book recently called Dopamine Nation that references some of the research that and books that you've listed here. Mm-hmm. But we're all addicted to our phones, right? It's the perfect, dopamine hit, mm-hmm. right? But we're adults, right? And it's a kid who's, 10 to 15 years old, right? That stimulus, they don't know how to regulate that and can't put it down.
Yeah.
And interested if you've got ideas of how to talk to kids about this. They don't realize the problem that they've got.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%. So I have the fourth of the 4 sections. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these things. So I'm happy to, I can jump there now, or I can keep talking a little bit and then we can see as a group, once I get to the end, maybe to discuss some of these things in more detail. I think just as a brief point to address that, I'll say first, I don't have a good answer. These things are designed to be behaviorally addictive, and so we are all addicted to them. It's really, really hard when something is not only so available, but so normalized to the extent that if I were to say I'm not going to have a smartphone anymore, I think that I may have negative implications in my job for not checking my email all the time. And so it's not just that it's hard to not, be behaviorally addicted to them. It's that it's in some ways beneficial for us to have them in order to live in this world. I definitely don't have answers to that problem. But when it comes to talking to your kids, I do have some ideas, and they're mostly related to a lot of the kind of parenting tips that you've heard before about open communication and trying to invite kids to reflect critically on the experiences that they're having. So maybe I'll kind of go quickly through this next section that talks a little bit about the potentially beneficial aspects of digital media use, and then we'll dive into the how to talk to your kid, parent monitoring kind of question.
You don't need to disrupt your presentation, but I'm glad to hear that you'll cover some of that in the later section.
Yeah, so I'll go through this section quickly because, it's not just that digital media is rewarding. We know it's rewarding. We know that it can help us, and we know it can help our teens. So we'll make this section quick, and then we'll talk about what I think is the really hard part, as you mentioned, the practical applications. So when we think about like the potential benefits of digital media, I think plenty of great experiences online come to mind. I personally think we're living in like the golden era of memes, a time when like I can pull up my phone and laugh out loud at something that like some random person created. And that's wonderful. That brings me joy. And it's in part because of these same features, the things that I just implicated in a lot of the challenges. The fact that we are able to have like visual content means that I have memes, and the fact that there's like these public platforms where people can create this content and I can see it means that I can laugh, and that's really lovely. And we're living in really different times when it comes to having access to information, and this is something that may like completely transform adolescent development relative to like when you all were kids and also when I was a kid. So we know that some time like scrolling on your phone is time wasted, but some of it is not. Some of it is, beneficial. We can see things that bring us joy, see things that give us information. And that is because of these features, because it's always available. We can Google, who was that guy who was in that movie that one time? And then we have that information. And because it's public, all of this information is like curated by an enormous number of people. And again, some of that information and some of the apps that we might use are bad. Some of them are not. I think the greatest benefit for social media, and one that's important to consider when we're thinking about talking to kids or about our own use, because it's so rewarding and it's like so valuable for our well-being, is social connection. So it's because of digital media that kids can, talk to their friends at all hours, day or night. They can check up on their friends. They can see these public updates and see how friends maybe who moved away are doing. That could be really beneficial. They can share funny information and they can connect in ways that are exciting and complex and creative and provide this opportunity for expression. Like drawing little images on a Snapchat photo can be really fun. It can be a really great way to bond with a friend. And friends are important. They're like one of the great joys of being a human being, and especially for teens. We also know that a lot of teens, actually the majority of teens in the US, say that they have made a friend online, a friend who they only know online. And there's not enough information, not enough research about this. This is afforded by these same features. We don't know if it's good or bad. I think for some kids it's good, and for some kids it may not be good. For some kids it can buffer them, kids who don't have offline friends or who have trouble making friends offline. But for some kids, it also may be displacing the opportunity to experience those really uncomfortable feelings of making a new friend in the offline world before then you have a new friend, which is a wonderful thing. Kids also have access to communities. This can be huge, especially for kids who maybe are interested in seeing representation of people who are like them, or finding a role model, or trying to understand more about themselves and how they relate to these social experiences throughout the world. And there is emerging and pretty strong growing evidence that there are unique positive effects for kids who are facing marginalization. So for example, for kids who identify as LGBTQ, for kids who are racial and ethnic minorities, especially in a place that's majority white, kids who maybe have unique community needs, like kids who have a certain diagnosis or some challenge that they have, or even just something that they're really interested in, that they are really loving talking about with someone online. And also for rural teens, so teens who maybe have less access to friends kind of in real life or right down the road. Where I grew up, I had to like get in the car and drive 30 minutes to see anyone that I knew from my social circles. And this is, a unique opportunity, especially for kids who are in rural communities and who are facing marginalization, who maybe have some really unique benefits of getting online and having those connections. So how do we make digital media then work for us? And specifically, how do we make it work for our kids and talk to our kids about it? So I will note that I do not have kids. You all actually probably could tell me a lot more about how to talk to kids about digital media than I can tell you. So I'll share a bit of the research that I know and some strategies that, some evidence has suggested is beneficial. Of course, like broad evidence is just about like on average what works for some people. And there's lots of different ways to parent a kid, and there's lots of different things that work for some people and not others. And so the first thing that I'll mention is the idea of mindfulness and how mindfulness may play into digital media use. Now, we all probably know what mindfulness is. It's this idea of being attentive and being kind of openly attending to and curious about, but non-judgmental about one's experience, your maybe internal experience, thoughts and feelings, or what you're doing in terms of your behaviors. And some of you may be thinking, yes, definitely mindfulness is the solution. And others may be thinking like, gosh, mindfulness cannot possibly be the solution to every single problem that we have. And that would be a reasonable response. It's not a silver bullet. But I do think when it comes to digital media, it may have some unique benefits. And this is an artist from LA who did this artwork about the difference between being mindful and not being mindful. And I think it helps us understand how mindfulness can help us with phone and social media use in particular, is that mindfulness helps us get out from the thing that's really rewarding or that's all consuming, and actually observe it with some distance. And that distance is what we need to be able to say like, wow, I just picked up my phone and I have no idea why. Let me think about that. I wonder what preceded that behavior. And so ways to be mindful, and these are framed in terms of your own mindful use, but this is something that you can think about, talk to your kid about, or maybe encourage your kid to think about as well. It has to do with just simply paying attention, just pausing, noticing, when do you pick up your phone? How do you feel when you pick up your phone? Maybe scrolling through your phone and noticing kind of your emotions. Like when I'm on Instagram scrolling, what do I actually feel? Am I feeling true joy, or am I just kind of like numbing out? Or am I feeling anxious? And there are ways that we can also use some of the technology on our phone to help us be more mindful, like setting reminders, putting screen limits on certain apps, things like that. These can just be ways to kind of ping us to pay attention again to what we're doing. We also need to kind of ask those tough questions. So like, what really is it that I want out of this device? What is it that I really want to get from social media? We have to understand what it is we want and how we want to make a change in order to actually make that change. And this requires us to be kind of like critical of the way that we may have built some habits. So for example, like I always charge my phone next to my bed, and every single time I plug it in, I think, gosh, I should really move this and put it over in the kitchen. I haven't done it yet. This is why we need to ask those tough questions. We need to take the time to actually sit down and figure out how are we going to live our lives in a way that's positive while using digital media. And so that requires us to probably like set aside a real time, like sit down for 30 minutes and really think, is this how I want to use my phone? How do I want to make a change? And this is something that you can do alone, or you can do with your partner or your teen. Really sitting and thinking, writing out what are the things that I like, what are the things that I don't like, and what do I want to change? And it might be helpful to make a list of like the non-negotiable things. Like for me, using my phone to like text people, these like private interactions with people that I love are incredibly valuable. And I also really like having my email available all the time. What I don't need is notifications all the time from my email. And what I don't need is social media. So I've turned off notifications from my email, and I've gotten social media off my phone. There's pros and cons of all these decisions, but we have to sit and think through the pros and the cons, the benefits and the costs of all of the things that we do, and realize that, every day when we wake up, we're making a decision to use our phone in a certain way. Even if it's habitual, we can pull ourselves out of that. So all of the information that I'm sharing in these sort of like applied ideas section come directly from my colleague, Dr. Jackie Nisi, who's like one of the leading researchers on these ideas. She's phenomenal. She's a parent herself, and she has this Substack page. If you take a picture of that QR code, it'll bring you to it, or the link is right there, technosapiens.substack.com. And all of her advice is it's really sound, it's really grounded in research, and it's really straightforward and like kind of no bullshit. I think it's really phenomenal. So I highly recommend that. So when it comes to monitoring how your teen uses their phone, there's a lot of different behaviors that someone could engage in. So you can ask yourself, how often do you check what your teen is doing online, maybe the websites that they're visiting, the messages that they're engaging in, or maybe the call records, who they're talking to? How often do you use certain parental controls? Do you actually physically restrict what apps they can use, or for how long? How often do you talk to your teen? This is a really tricky one, about things like inappropriate sharing or inappropriate viewing or access or content. And do you know your teen's passwords for things like their social media accounts or their cell phone? These are all just some options, some ways that you can think about potential parental monitoring. And we know from some nationally representative data of parents that people are doing these strategies in a variety of ways. There's no one size fits all. The majority of parents are engaging in communication with their teens, which is the one thing that I will say without a doubt has benefits. So you don't need to check the websites your teen is visiting. You don't need to check call records. Some parents do. Some parents find it helpful. Some don't. There's a bit of a split in terms of parents who know their teens' passwords, and this may be different depending on all kinds of different factors, like how old your teen is, for example. And there's a couple key components of parental monitoring to keep in mind. So doing just one of these and maybe overlooking the others may not be like fully comprehensive. So an important aspect of teen monitoring is that your teen is like telling you what they're doing or telling you how they're thinking about these things, and that you're asking, so you're like soliciting that information and seeing if you can invite them to share more. And then there's this other component of supervision or monitoring, or to some extent control in different areas. And so when we think about these different aspects of parental monitoring, they're absolutely not one size fits all. It's not just how old your kid is, but it's important to think about how mature your kid is. And it might be that, one kid at one age is more or less mature than your other kid at a different age. All kids are different in different ways. Some kids are also more prone to like certain risk taking or rule breaking or deviant kinds of behaviors. You may be more thoughtful about how those kids are using digital media in potentially risky ways, things like risky sexual behaviors online, or maybe seeing images of friends like using substances, doing risky behaviors online that can make them think that those things are really normal or that those things don't have negative consequences. Some kids are also more prone to like moodiness or fearfulness. Those kids may be more sensitive to some of the negative aspects of social media, maybe things like peer rejection, like not getting enough likes, for example, having someone ghost them or not text them back. Those things might be more important to consider for kids who have those moody tendencies. Some kids are also more prone to social influence. Some kids are just really sensitive to social information. And so you may also want to consider what kinds of content kids are exposed to if they're more sensitive to that information, and to thinking that information that they see online might be normative or beneficial. And then you can also monitor in different ways across different hardware, software. Maybe, you know your kid's phone password, but not the passwords of social media accounts, for example. And maybe you restrict access to some apps and not others. And so I think this question of like where to start, how to actually talk to teens about digital media is, again, really tricky. And I certainly don't have all the answers. But some of the research that I have seen suggests a couple things. And I'll note too that the research is ongoing and certainly not done. Certainly doesn't have a simple answer. But the research suggests that parents should ask open-ended questions when possible. And this can be anything, just asking your teen to tell you more about what they're doing on their device, why they want a device if they don't have one. You can ask them like, what do you look at when you're on Instagram? Or how does it feel when you scroll through your feed? What are the things you like about it? What are the things you don't like about it? And you all have teens, so you, again, probably know this better than I do, but sometimes teens can be a little upset if you suggest that you maybe know the right way to do something, or that you're concerned about their safety when they're just trying to like enjoy their day on Instagram. And so it doesn't have to be like you sit down and have the talk, like the tech talk. It can be something that's kind of casual and ongoing, and hopefully something that you're truly just kind of curious about, and just invite them to share with you about what they're doing online. So you can get some of that information and start to understand why they're using it. And as much as possible, just like encouraging honesty and openness. So you can be honest with your teen about like, yeah, I also feel like sometimes I'm addicted to my phone and I don't really like it. Or like, I really love like these memes that I see on here, but I actually realize when I scroll for 30 minutes at a time, I feel kind of crummy at the end of that. And those conversations can be organic, and sometimes that's easier said than done. But you can just like maybe start by dropping in little nuggets of, open-ended questions and experiences that you yourself had. And then asking those questions is important, but also listening is really important. And listening sometimes can be the best way to kind of open that door to have a kid like tell you the things that you really want to know about what they're doing online or how they're experiencing it. So as much as possible, it can be so hard when you like love and care about your kid, but withholding judgment or any kind of, suggestion of judgment or suggestion of concern. I think it's really easy for us, like when we didn't grow up in this context, to think that things are so bad, or that things could be so bad if a kid just takes one wrong step. But all of Gen Z is growing up with these technologies, and they're all going to be okay. There's very, very few cases where negative things are going to happen online that are going to be truly, truly life or death or consequential. They do happen. I'm not saying they don't happen, but to the extent that you can maybe invite kids to just share with you what's happening and assume that probably a lot of that is good and some of it that's bad maybe is minor in scale, may encourage those conversations to be more open and organic. Something else that I recommend is trying to remember the details of what your kid tells you. And this is just like a generally good way to engage in social relationships. If your kid is really, really excited about like a certain thing on Minecraft that like you could not care less about, maybe take a second and think, wow, they're really excited about this thing that seems really foreign and alien to me. How can I really open up and like listen to what they're saying and remember those details to indicate to them that I really care about the things that they like with the digital world? And then maybe when we're having these conversations where they feel like I'm really supporting them and the things that they love, then they'll be more likely to tell me about the things that aren't going well or the times that they're having negative consequences. Another general like clinical psychology tip is when you're having these conversations that can sometimes feel like you're walking through a landmine, is to reflect back and summarize what kids are saying. This is again just like something as simple as like, oh, well, it sounds like when he didn't text you back, you were really confused by what he meant by that. Just repeating what they said as an indication that you're listening and that you care can help foster those really open and beneficial conversations. And another clinical psych tip is emphasizing that the way that a kid might be feeling about the experience that they're having, again, even if it's totally alien to you, just emphasizing that it's normal, because the fact that they had that reaction means that it is normal. Saying something like, of course you feel confused that he didn't text you back. Of course you're not sure what's going on in the relationship. He didn't text you back. That's a way of providing more of like an emphasis that a kid's reactions to their online experiences are totally normal. So once you have asked questions and listened thoughtfully to what your kid's saying, you can consider some perhaps more extreme options of actually like looking or doing these more controlling parental monitoring behaviors. There are a range of different ways to do this. And again, there's no one right way that works for everyone. There are headlines that are like, checking your teen's phone is like an extreme violation of trust. And then there are headlines that's like, if you don't check your teen's phone, then the worst thing will happen. Probably neither of those is true. Probably that sensationalizing headlines is meant to just get you to click on those websites. It's more likely the case that you can try out a couple different things, that there's no one right or wrong way to do this. So after you've asked and listened, you can consider using digital media with your teen. So if they really like playing a certain game, you can sit and play it with them, or ask them if they can show you maybe what it is that they really enjoy about using digital media. And that could include getting a tour. So you could say like, show me your Instagram. I'm just curious to see what it is that you like about it, what it is that excites you, like what are the kinds of things that you enjoy looking at. And they can show you a little bit about what they're doing on that platform. There are also some ways in the software that you can pair phones. So like you may have done this already, where you have access to certain like screen time controls on your teen's phone. You can also actually access that technology, and I highly recommend communicating to them what, when, or how, like in which context you will do these kinds of spot checks where you look at their phone or look at their social media content. It's not that it's necessarily like good or bad to do this, but there is some evidence to suggest that if you don't kind of communicate in advance what you're doing and why, that kids might try to circumvent those controls, because unfortunately teens today know a lot more about technology than we do. So we need to recognize that they may have the upper hand if we try to kind of control what they're doing without giving them warning. They may try to do something sneaky to avoid that monitoring. and likely they're going to be able to do that just fine. Sometimes parents and teens will share passwords, and maybe this is just as a way to kind of be aware in emergency situations. So maybe a teen will write down their password and like put it in a place in the house where everyone knows that it is, but it'll only be accessed in case of emergencies. You can also follow or friend your kid on apps to kind of see what they post and let them know that you're available for them. And then there's all kinds of apps and software. I'm sure y'all have seen a lot of these that can help limit or directly monitor behavior. And these can include things like, these are just a couple that I found online. Bark is a really popular one where you can actually limit what kids are, what apps they're using. Google Family Link is relatively cheap and you can see where your kid is or set app limits again. And one thing that I think it's important to consider is that how you communicate these decisions that you make can be so challenging, but it does require some direct and clear communication. And it can be as simple as telling your kid that it's your job to keep them safe. It's your job as a parent to be aware of what they're doing and help protect them from some of the things that they may not know are harmful. They may not like that, but that's some information that they at least will understand as they grow older. You can also tell them that, in case of emergencies, when you're really concerned about their health and safety, you do need to be able to have some of this access, but also that you care about their autonomy and want to support them in making those balanced decisions about how you can monitor without overstepping that. And also, just because you're making some decisions to, for example, check on what your kid's doing online every couple of months or something, it doesn't have to be a decision that is kind of set in stone. So you can tell a kid, for example, well, here's the plan. This is what I think is important for us to do as a family right now. And let's do this for a month, and then we'll check back in and see how it's going down the road. So nothing has to be permanent. It can also always be kind of an ongoing open conversation. So if any of those tips were helpful, I highly recommend, again, checking out Jackie's Substack. I think as there's some takeaway ideas, these things are really hard. If at all possible, be kind to yourself and your teen when you're trying to limit or control the way that you're using these platforms. There's a $5.2 trillion industry working against you. And it is a process, and these digital tools are changing every day. And so we have to slowly build those skills to engage in that process and recognize that it's not a destination. All right, that is all. And I'm really excited to take some more questions and talk maybe more about this idea of talking to teens to the extent that that's helpful for anyone here.
Annie, we have a great question in the chat, and one that I ask myself all the time about my 6th grader. What's the balance between not allowing any social media for your teens, but not wanting to isolate them from their friends and those social connections?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I will say this is sort of like circumventing the question, but we do not have really clear data on the extent to which that isolation versus limiting social media, like the pros and cons of those decisions. There's no study that has yet really tested, like, is it truly harmful to be isolated from your peers by not having social media, or is it truly more harmful to be on social media at younger ages? So that is just to say that there is not a single right answer to address that question. That said, there are a variety of different types of social media platforms, and there are limits you can put on certain social media platforms so that you can allow your child to have access to those platforms or to have access to their friends via those platforms in ways that you think maybe work better for them. So it really depends on the kid, on the platform that they want to access, and how you're concerned that they might access it. So just as an example, you could think about something like Snapchat is something that kids use a lot, and sometimes use for things like talking about homework, for example. So it can be really hard to limit access to those really valuable tools. But as a parent, you can limit things like when they're using those apps. Maybe their phone doesn't allow them to access those apps after hours when they should be sleeping. Maybe you're limiting or turning off the location sharing service so that they're not sharing where they physically are with anyone that they're connected with. And also thinking about ways that you can maybe have conversations that are really detailed about, here is the app that you're using, here is the way that I hope that you'll use it to connect with your friends, and here are all of the concerns that I have about the app, and I'd like to support you, my teen, in accessing the app in a way that's beneficial to you. So being really open and honest about the limits that you're hoping to set, and then having those ongoing conversations, I think, can be beneficial.
And if I can ask a further question about just phones in general, I feel like when my oldest daughter, who's now 19, was in 6th grade, like my youngest, there was this big movement about waiting until 8th grade to get them phones, wait till 8th. And we've kind of been doing that same thing with our youngest. And of course, she feels like she's the only one in the world without a phone at her age. And so I'm wondering if that still holds true, and is that still sort of the philosophy?
That's a good question. That's actually not something that I've heard before. I'm guessing that that's the kind of advice that more is like in parenting circles, because where I live, it's like a lot of like, well, we don't know. There's a lot of open questions. We need more research, and you all are parents and you need at least some answer right now. So the idea of waiting until 8th grade is not something that I would say is entirely supported by the literature, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good idea in general. One thing that I can add to that, and I'm guessing many of you are aware of these, is that there are lots of different alternatives for phones. So there are these things that people are calling dumb phones, which looks like a smartphone. So a kid can maybe like pull it out and not feel embarrassed by their like old timey flip phone. But it doesn't actually have access to the internet, or it doesn't have access to certain apps. So it's a way of like allowing kids to kind of check the box of feeling like they're part of that social community without them actually having those tools. And there are a variety of different providers that sell those apps. Bark, for example, actually sells a phone that has the Bark software kind of built in terms of being able to monitor what your kid is doing, if that's something that you choose to do. I will also say again that, we do not know if a kid feeling left out is like truly harmful. It's certainly like really stressful for a kid. I'm not saying that it's not challenging, but there are also some harms of being on these platforms. And so I just can't say for sure if letting your kid get on those platforms because they're distressed about being left out is the better choice. There is not evidence to tell us what to do in those cases yet. So that's the kind of thing that as a parent, it may be important to kind of think through what kinds of vulnerabilities does my kid have and how can I kind of circumvent those before they get on these tools.
Thank you. And I'm assuming it goes back to what you said before about their own maturity, and it's probably different for every kid and all that good stuff. We have another question. Any parallels able to be drawn for parental guidelines with gaming versus social media?
Great question. So in my mind, I actually think of gaming as social media. Actually just wrote a paper about this. Gaming is like social media, a way that a lot of kids are connecting to their friends. And we know that especially young boys are connecting to friends via gaming. And similar to social media, it's like these digital devices through which social connection is mediated. So there are different features that can shape the way that they're having these experiences. Kids can get on games and talk to total strangers who they're like in the same, gaming context with. Kids can be on games and connect with their friends. They can play a game while they're also talking through the like voice chatting functions, maybe to a friend about something that's really challenging, but it's easier to talk about it while they're gaming than when they're like face to face having these dyadic interactions. Gaming, like social media, when used in excess, when used at a level that might be considered problematic or that's displacing things like sleep or going outside and having friends in the real world, can have a lot of negative consequences. Gaming in and of itself probably doesn't have clear direct consequences. It's probably more what is happening on the games, what types of negative experiences are kids having or being exposed to. We know also that on gaming platforms, things like bullying and harassment and sexism and homophobia are really common. Kids might be learning normative ideas about things like violence, although there's very limited evidence to suggest that viewing violence on video games is directly related to aggressive outcomes. it's more likely the case that there are some mixed outcomes associated with using gaming. And probably what I would suggest is if your kid is on games for a really extensive amount of time, that's when we might want to think about limiting what they're doing, as well as talking to them about the experiences that they're having on those games. Yes, so this question from Elizabeth is a really important one. And this brings me back to my point about when it comes to setting limits, I think there's some real value in the context of digital media, maybe more than anything else, of allowing for more open communication, and instead of sort of a top-down parenting approach, allowing for more of a bottom-up strategy, because kids really do know how to get around these limits, and it's fairly easy to do, right? You just have to Google how to do it. And even things like Bark that you can like pay a bunch of money for every month to monitor your kid's activity. All that a kid has to do is like turn off cellular service, and then they can engage in certain interactions. And then when they go back on cell service, those are like deleted from the content that the parent sees. So unfortunately, that's like a really dire situation when it comes to using those limits and parental controls in a way that's beneficial, which is why that open communication and inviting a kid to like join you in the process of creating healthy digital habits is probably going to be the best strategy, other than more extreme forms of control, like not giving a kid a phone, which may be the best option for some kids as well.
I will offer a comment that I'm not entirely sure how we did it, so I can't offer advice on that. But we have iPhones. Our daughter's a freshman in high school, 14, and we have Apple has the screen time element that can show you what's there. And I think at some point we were talking. We've had conversations around that and used it as a conversation starter to say this, and it's become one of those things now sometimes where she'll be like, okay, Dad, so like how much were you on TikTok this week or something like that? And it's become a little bit of a thing sometimes, because there have been some times when she's had lower numbers than me. And
Oops, I think we lost Dan there. Yeah, so, oh, sorry, I think we lost the last bit of what you were saying, Dan.
all I said was that it's become a useful way to have conversations around that. And I would say to Jenny, we had a similar thing about phones for a long while. One of the things that we did was we also, again, we're in the iPhone world, and so we used one of the things that restricted them from installing any apps. They had to be approved by a parent. And so it became a conversation starter about why certain apps would be allowed or not. And I work in IT security and stuff, so I'm paranoid on privacy things and stuff. So the side effect of that was that my daughters came to understand that, you know, I would only allow a thing on if it wasn't going to be like capturing your location information and doing something like that. So it created things. It got to be really annoying, quite honestly, after a while, and at some point we ended that. But they, you know, I think they retained some amount of that, because they subsequently would be like, okay, Dad, I looked at this one. It's not going to go and suck all my data out and give it to somebody else.
But it sounds like you did a really thoughtful job, though, of like teaching your kids about the importance of maybe looking into like what's in the fine print before I just click.
Well,
down.
Part of it was because I wouldn't approve it unless they did. You know, it was like, well, why can't I have this? I'd be like, well, because it's going to take your contact information, this information, that information, and like, why? Because you want to play this, you know. So having some of those things about that, you know, hopefully guided them toward that path.
That sounds really valuable.
I will say that now that she's in high school and all that, you know, those conversations are a lot harder. Or you know, so what are you doing? Oh, stuff. Yeah. You know.
Yeah.
Annie, does any of your research look at how schools look at kids using devices during school? I think CVU, our high school locally, the policy is that kids are not supposed to be using their phones, but my kids tell me kids are on the phones all day long.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And being an older dad, that just blows me away. Like, I can't believe that. Like, why do schools even allow kids to have the phones? I mean, it seems like such a distraction.
Yeah, so there's really clear evidence that using your phone during class is bad for academic outcomes, and that's like longitudinal, and we have some experimental evidence too. So it's not just that the kids who are more likely to check their phone in class or the kids who are less likely to pay attention. Anyway, it's that distraction potentially causes negative outcomes for academic performance. So phones in the classroom, not a good thing. That said, I know that there are some schools that are working on certain like school-wide implementations to actually restrict kids from using their phones. There's these little, I forget what they're called, these like little pockets that some schools use where kids come in, they put their phone in these little device, like little containers that lock when they go into the school. And then they have their phone on them. So it's not like they're giving their phone up, but they can't use it until they exit the school building and like click this little magnetic thing. So there's stuff like that people are doing. I think, if I were a parent living in the world that we live in where there is school violence that happens at levels that are sometimes really concerning, I might be concerned about my kid not having any phone at all. And so I think part of the challenge too, that may or may not be true with CVU, is that some parents probably want their kid to have a phone when they're in school. Yeah. And so how do you strike that balance? I don't know. It's really, really hard to completely limit kids using their phones, but we're also living in a world where using digital media in the classroom is so normalized that the average kid probably would be really shocked if a teacher like really kind of stuck to their guns on those kinds of rules. And it probably would be beneficial for the kids if they didn't have any technology in the classroom, but that's definitely not the direction that we're going, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, or do you have follow-up questions?
No, I think that makes sense. I know some of the classes have like a little, it looks like a shoe caddy almost, but it's like a little pocket, a wall of little pockets that you could put a phone in. And some teachers ask the kids to put their phones in this, thing just so they're not fiddling with it. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like that's the exception rather than the norm.
I think so. I don't know what the norm is like across the country, but I know that a lot of schools are struggling with this exact question. And I think one of the things too, when we think about like just how rewarding these devices are, is that asking a kid to put their phone, in their pocket where they can reach into their pocket and get it at any point during the class period is probably not setting them up for success. Even if a kid is like really dedicated to learning and being present in the classroom, having that thing vibrate in their pocket is going to be bad for them. And so we need to think about like, the kind of like immediate rewards, the like hedonic pleasure of like having access to that phone might be valuable, but as parents and teachers and like policymakers, we maybe need to be a little bit more top down in some of those strategies at the school level.
Yeah, I see Jenny's comment there about school-wide phone policy off and away. When my kids were in middle school, they followed that. They went to Charlotte Central. Mm-hmm. But in high school, although they may say that, it sounds like that's not happening at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember even, when I was in high school, which is like a decade plus ago, there was also a rule that you couldn't have phones, and people had them out then. And I think things have changed increasingly in the direction of more technology in the classroom, and to some extent more, how do I say this thoughtfully, like more leeway to students that I think probably comes after the pandemic of kids really, really struggling and teachers wanting to make sure that kids are okay. But, as the adult in the room, sometimes we have to tell a kid that we actually do know better than they do. And I think the pendulum has swung in the other direction, and it may need to swing back just a bit.
One thing that I try to be mindful of, but it only occurs maybe 25% of the time, is really good modeling. Like I get home from work and I have a hard time checking out of checking my email, even though I'm not scheduled to do any brain surgery or, not like, I don't need to be checking my phone. I don't know. It's not an expectation that I'm checking email for my job at 7:00 at night, but yet I'm still doing it. So I'll sometimes, like if I'm being very mindful, like you started this with, is put it in the other room. So it has to be actually physically away from me to actually make a difference, which is horrible and embarrassing because I don't even like my phone. And I was a very late adopter. So it's like, it has to be somewhere else. And I think modeling for both teachers and staff members in a school and for parents at home is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. And I talk about it too. I'll even say, like, I can't believe I'm looking at my phone right now when I haven't seen you all day long. I'm sorry. I'll put it down. And just try to almost like narrate when I make mistakes like that, or what I'm doing sometimes. Like I have this really important thing I have to do for work that I didn't get to today. I'm just going to do this quickly and then I'm going to set it down. And
so telegraphing what you're doing.
Yeah, sort of. But again, that maybe happens 25% of the time. After tonight, I'm going to be back on track again. So thank you.
Remember, $5.2 trillion industry working to keep you picking up that phone as much as possible. So being kind to yourself while also trying to model those things is important.
Any last comments or thoughts or questions for Annie?
I would just say that it is, you're absolutely right. It's super addictive. I have a challenge. I've been working with social media since the mid 2000s when it was all brand new, because I work in communications and marketing. So it's part of my day job. And I've also been super skeptical of it. And I'm pretty good with everything, except I will tell you that darn TikTok algorithm. It's like somebody goes and tells me to go, and they're like, Dan, you should see this video that somebody put out, like for work or something. And I'll go there, and like 30 minutes later, I haven't even seen that video because I got distracted by something else. So it's one of those that the industry and that particular one has me nailed pretty good.
Yeah, the TikTok algorithm in particular. There's something there that is a good algorithm. Yeah. And we actually, some folks that I work with who are more in the neuroscience side of things are doing a study right now to look at if there are neurological symptoms of withdrawal when we have kids basically give up their phone for a full day.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. We'll see what we'll see what we know that there are definitely those behavioral symptoms. So
I recently listened to a book called Dopamine Nation that was touched on that everything in our life, it's all about getting hits of dopamine, and these are, all they do is fire the signals in the brain that, trigger excitement, and there's absolutely withdrawal if you don't get that. Like you say, it's a $5.2 billion industry. It's banking on you having that sort of emotional connection to getting that hit of dopamine every time there's a blip or a beep or a badge has a higher number, or something to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another book, also, if people are interested in book recommendations, is Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. It does a really good job of talking about not just phones, but kind of like the world that we live in and how hard it can be to like be able to.
Stolen Focus?
Stolen Focus. Yeah, I can actually.
Oh yeah, Why You Can't Pay Attention.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. And also recommend this book by Emily Weinstein and Carrie James, who at the Harvard School of Ed, they have this great book on digital media that unfortunately is already starting to become a bit out of date, but it's really helpful.
Thank you.
Well, if no one has any other further questions or comments, we can end our evening together with a great big thanks to you, Annie, and to each of you for being here. I'm really excited to have this recording because I think it'll now live on our digital world and be helpful to a lot of other parents who weren't able to be with us tonight. So thank you so much for your time, and it was great to have you with us here.
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't show you the snow tonight.
Yeah. I don't miss the snow, but I'm really grateful for everyone being here. And if anyone has questions, you're welcome to email me. My email is just this, and I'm happy to chat further.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Take care.